Thank you for inviting me to hopefully share some information with you with what's going on in our public K-12 schools from a facilities and COVID response. As Raphael had mentioned, his team has been working tirelessly trying to come up with best practices, resources on where teachers can access information. My job, and let me back up a little bit. So the Mass Facilities Administrators Association, we're a nonprofit professional association that supports all public facilities directors throughout Massachusetts. So about 170 members across the Commonwealth of all the folks who are facilities administrators that take care of your town halls, police stations, fire stations, but primarily our public K-12 schools. So our job is to try and figure out how to keep everybody happy. So we're working with the Superintendents Association. We're working with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We're working with the Mass Teachers Association. We're working with the business officials. We're trying to have everyone get on the same page, at least speaking the same language, because right now it's a really, really hard time. There's so much divisiveness, and there's so much, this COVID thing has been a moving target since its inception back in March of trying to figure out what the best response is. And every day, that response seems to change a little bit. Some nuances change. What we focused on just 3 months ago is something that we're certainly not focused on now. So I wanted to give everyone an update as to where we kind of stand now and what we're seeing across the state, and a little background information about some of the complexities that we're running into. It's easy to tell everyone to do the same thing. That's an easy thing to do. To be able to pull that off is virtually impossible, because what happens in Massachusetts is we're a very diverse state, especially when it comes to our facilities and buildings. Everyone's been trying to pull up the building data. What do you have for a building? Well, some towns might have a 1950s elementary school in it that has steam radiators and operable windows, and that's their HVAC system. And in that same town, they might have a state-of-the-art, brand new, high-efficiency building that was just finished in 2019 that already has the MERV 13 filters that Raphael had mentioned to and alluded to. You can't have the same response for both buildings. So in your individual community itself, you very well could have 5 different responses for 5 different schools on what that building and what that facility is capable of providing as far as reducing risk and minimizing risk. We're not going to be able to eliminate it. So it's trying to make the best decisions that are going to have the most bang for the buck as to what we're looking at. So what we're going to cover, just some COVID updates. I'm going to talk about the cleaning, the what, the why, the how, and really talk and discuss about HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. If folks have questions as we go along, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat box. So if you think it's something that's important to ask, I just wanted to share with you, MFAA does have a public resource page for COVID. That's the link to it. It's massfacilities.com, and you'll see COVID resources. Anyone can click on it. Our resource page is a little bit different than a lot of others because we're really focused in on facilities. We're really focused in on what best practices are, some resources that you can go to figure out the best approach as it relates to facilities. We don't care about testing. We don't care about contract tracing. We don't care about all that other fun stuff. We're really nuts and bolts, what filters you can use, the Harvard School, T.H. Chan School of Public Health's guidance for opening schools, ASHRAE's guidance, that's all up there. So if you really want to geek out and nerd out like us facilities folks do, it's a good location to start if you have questions about what a best practice might be. So what the state has asked us to do in communities across the Commonwealth, what we're doing is we're checking and seeing. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this beautiful map. It's a lot of red now. It's even squeaking out towards Western Mass. And I've been tracking this since we started using this benchmark to figure out where your community falls. And there are guidelines as to recommended being virtual for your school, being hybrid for your school, being all in person. And it's based off the percentage of per 100,000 people in your communities. I'm sure you folks are very familiar with this. And I'm sure you're very familiar with the hotspots. And it's weird how they've grown so fast in some areas that are pretty rural. So you wouldn't expect it, but it seems to be more, the COVID keeps shifting now. And now I guess we're focused on house parties, so no one having Thanksgiving together. So I always tell people to go to the state's website, check on your community, see where they're at. That's the best way to get the up-to-date information on that. So cleaning products. I am on, because I don't know how to say no to people when they ask me to volunteer for things, I'm on the operational service division, the state contract for buying goods. I'm on the sourcing team for green cleaning products for the Commonwealth. It's FAC 85. I really believe in that there are safer products that we can be using. Speaking to the nurses that are on this call, I know the nursing industry, they have held on to using bleach as the go-to for a long time. Scares the hell out of me because bleach is not very safe and not very stable. So for any people that are on here saying it's the only thing, hopefully by the end of this discussion, I can convert you. So there's a lot of components into this. So it's cleaning versus disinfecting versus sanitizing. And I won't get too geeky into it, but you should know that cleaners don't disinfect and disinfectants don't clean. There are two different chemicals, two different procedures, two different things you need to do. And in order to disinfect properly, you need to clean the surface first. At the beginning of this pandemic, I saw like, oh, how the MBTA, no disrespect to the MBTA, but they need a training protocol on their custodians. How does it look when a cleaner is going in there with the same rag they've just wiped down 5 buses with? The thing was dirty, disgusting, and I just said, ooh, look at all that cross-contamination going on. There are procedures, protocols, and ways to clean things properly. Once you clean them, then you can disinfect them. The reason I say disinfect versus sanitize, what we're doing now is for food surfaces, you need to use a sanitizer, preferably a no-rinse sanitizer. And that's required so that way we're not making kids sick when they're eating their lunches. Well, now a lot of our schools have shifted to serving lunches in their classrooms and not the cafeteria anymore. Well, now you just change the type of that surface. So what we're trying to do is educate people to make sure that they're using a food-grade sanitizer in a classroom versus a disinfectant, or one that qualifies as both, because now the kid's going to be eating their almond butter and jelly sandwich at that desktop, and you don't want to have all this skull and crossbones flying around your buildings. Any disinfectants you should be using will be listed on the EPA's registered list N as a disinfectant for COVID. Some things that are out there, and since March, I've been chasing a solution. I've been working with the Department of Public Health. I've been working with Turi Labs at UMass Lowell, the Toxic Use Reduction Institute. I've been trying for DEP, trying to find the safest product that will work best for everyone that doesn't require PPE. That's tricky. That is really hard. So finally, there are 3 products out on the market right now: Betco's GE Fightback, Hilliard's Clean Side, and Casey's Ecos Pro. All 3 of those are registered on List N. They're certified food grade sanitizers if you have a 5-minute dwell time, and they're certified disinfectants with a 10-minute dwell time. The difference between the two is just the length of time, and everything comes with dwell time. Just to educate folks about dwell time and educate folks about disinfectants and cleaners and all that stuff. What we're seeing in a lot of schools is, in the best interest, people are trying to do what they think is right. Parents are sending in kids with tubs of Clorox wipes. Teachers are bringing in disinfectant wipes that they found at Walgreens, they found at Ocean State Job Lot, they found wherever. They're bringing them in, but people aren't reading the back of the label. People don't understand that taking that wipe and just wiping the surface quickly doesn't disinfect, or they don't read the label that says you're supposed to be wearing gloves, a mask, an apron, goggles, what have you, whatever they're trying to say on the back of it. And keep in mind, the cleaning component is a very small piece of this. HVAC and airborne is really what we're focusing in on now. But cleaning is one of the tools in our toolbox is that we can't just step over. We can't just say, oh, there's only a 5% chance you're going to get it from a surface, so we can skip over that. That's not the right answer. We need to do this in addition to all the other things, in addition to the mask, in addition to the social distancing, in addition to all those things. The reason I talk about this at length is because we're seeing historical quantities of disinfectants being sprayed everywhere. Gallons and gallons and gallons of overexposing people. I'm concerned, long range, what's this going to do to the kids 10, 15 years from now? Is it going to cause skin damage? Is it going to cause neurological damage? Who the hell knows? So there are things that we can do that are going to help minimize that. Using safer products is a first huge step. There's a lot of new equipment on the market, electrostatic sprayers, foggers. Electrostatic sprayers are the preferred method right now. What they found with foggers, ultra low volume droplets, they're not as safe and they don't provide as much efficiency as far as leaving the droplets on the surface long enough to qualify for the kill. So what might happen is that you go in with a fogger, you fog the space down, but it's not letting it stay wet for the good 5 minutes that you need to. In the electrostatic sprayers, you can set the size of the droplets, and how those work is they electrify the spray coming out, and it'll wrap around the surface. So once you clean a desk, go in there with a sprayer, you spray it backwards. You don't walk into the mist, you walk away from the mist, and you use whatever protective equipment you need for the product you're using. And as you spray your way out, it'll wrap around that desk surface, it'll wrap around that doorknob, it'll wrap around that pencil sharpener, and it'll be able to stay wet long enough for the kill time. I was a facilities director for about 18 years. And part of my protocols at the beginning of every year, I was on my school's environmental health and safety committee. I was a very proactive facilities director, and I worked with the teachers and worked with the administration. I was part of the superintendent's administrative team. I would always establish a baseline at the beginning of the year, so that way we would know our buildings are safe. So that way, if something did come up, if you want to establish benchmarks, you have to have a custodial analysis of your buildings. You need to know what you were cleaning before COVID, so that way you can make adjustments to know how much you can accomplish after COVID. What that means is a lot of districts and a lot of schools don't have written procedures, don't have written protocols, don't have written training. And I'm glad to hear that Raphael and the MTA is requiring training. The MFAA, over the summer, we held a virtual custodial training certification program along with the Department of Labor Standards, talk about OSHA, talk about how to clean and disinfect during COVID. We had 1,250 people registered and attending across the Commonwealth that we trained a ton of custodians. It's not uncommon for districts not to have that in place. And you can't adjust your program if you don't know what your program is. Just throwing a set of keys and a map to a custodian and saying, here, go clean that, that's not effective. You can't do that. 20 years ago, that used to be the norm. Not anymore. There's too much at stake. There's too much accountability. So you need to evaluate what your custodians are cleaning, what the protocols are. Do they have good procedures? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing? Have you workloaded your building to figure out, do you have enough staffing to actually clean what you're supposed to be doing? I've listed a couple of resources up there. International Sanitary Supply Association and Association of Higher Ed Facilities Officers, both ISSA and APA have guidelines and guidance telling you based on square footage, based on fixture count, how much time does it take to clean a classroom? Well, if you really want to know, it takes 12 minutes. 12 minutes if the classroom is cleanable, meaning have the teachers had the kids flip the chairs at the end of the day? Well, that used to be what we do, but now we have to clean that desk surface. So don't flip the chairs, teachers. You were helping us before COVID, but now you're hurting us because now we have to go and unflip all those chairs to clean the desk surfaces and disinfect them. You know, with the pencils and debris off the floor, things of that nature. There's stuff that people can do to help out. It's a little tricky during COVID, so just make sure you're not making recommendations that potentially could harm kids. A great resource and a great tool for folks to look at. Turi Lab, the Toxic Use Reduction Institute at UMass Lowell, they have an entire website dedicated to safer cleaning and disinfecting of our schools. A lot of COVID resources up there, a lot of opportunities to learn on how to shift over from quaternary compounds, from bleach compounds, over to things that are safer, whether it's accelerated peroxides or some of the products that I had listed earlier on, citric-based products that are more designed for the environment, but they also look into things at a little bit of a deeper detail. You know, does it have thymol in it? Well, thymol is a naturally occurring product, but yeah, it causes asthma. So they really get into the weeds of it to kind of give you better ideas as to which way is the safer way to go. But again, if you're working with districts, if you're trying to figure out, even where you guys are working, your places of work, if there's no written down procedures and protocols with training and with expectations and with proper communication as to what you're doing with everyone, you should really look into that and figure out what the best way to improve the performance of your custodial staff. Right now, we're having a hard time in our schools with alcohol-based hand sanitizers. State Fire Marshal's office has provided guidance as to quantities you can have in a single place, quantities you can store within a building. So those are some of the big things that we're looking at now. Everyone was buying 1-gallon jugs of hand sanitizer for their classrooms. State Fire Marshal sent out guidance saying you can only have up to 0.53. So that made everyone shift gears real fast in the middle of a pandemic where it was so hard to find product to begin with. And now it's like the product we have might not be the right product. We're seeing a lot of substitutions. Say you use the disinfectant brand A and your supplier has run out of that. But the salesperson tells you, well, we have plenty of brand B. It's the same thing. We're going to send it out to you. Well, option B might not be the same exact thing. It may accomplish the same thing you're trying to have it accomplish, but you might be mixing dissimilar chemicals. It might require different PPE. It might not work in your electrostatic sprayers. So even though the salesperson says it's the same exact thing, it's your responsibility, and you have to do your due diligence to make sure that what you're getting is something that your team has been trained in, that they're familiar with. I'll say it again, products for home are killing us all the time. People bringing in alcohol wipes, people bringing in Clorox wipes. Our recommendation is the school should provide you with what they have, because we have our safety data sheets on them on file. So God forbid someone gets sick, someone ingests them, or someone gets them in their eye. We know what's in that, and we know how to treat it, and we know how to tell the medical team what they were exposed to, what people are exposed to. Whereas a teacher buying something, off of Amazon, God only knows where it's coming from, and you're not going to have that. PPE. People that are in the nursing industry, you're all too familiar with this. What's your burn rate? How much product do you go through? What do your team need in order to make sure that you're keeping your staff, your teachers, your custodians, and everyone safe in the building? Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, does have some guidance on what you should have. But again, it's dependent on the community. Every community is different in Massachusetts. What Jamaica Plain or what Hyde Park or Roxbury is buying for PPE is certainly not the same as Florida, Mass, or Middleton, Mass, or Leicester. Every community needs to figure out, and every school needs to figure out what they need and how much they need to have in inventory. Luckily, some of the inventory has been increasing. Tricky thing for us is, it's great that there's a lot of masks out there now. It's wonderful that people retooled and started manufacturing masks. That's what was needed most. But what that's done is that's created a backlog on the HVAC filter industry, because the media is the same media. So now you're seeing districts trying to order filters, and there's 6 to 8 week lead time in order to get filters in. Where can we go from there? And now we're going to scoot right along here. Let's get into HVAC. Like Raphael had said, that's the biggest thing we're dealing with right now. And we're all trying to figure out, we're all trying to get to a point where we're minimizing risk and bringing in as much fresh air as we can. What's the CO2? CO2 normal target temperature is between 8 and 1,000 parts per million. That's always a tricky number for us facilities folks, because depending on the time of year in New England, the outdoor parts per million could be elevated. We don't pump oxygen into our buildings. So if you're starting with a baseline of 525 outside, it's really hard to hit that 800 mark. I don't care how much fresh air you're bringing in, you're up against some things. Typically the outdoor mark is 400, so 800 is achievable. But those are the things that when you're looking at these, everyone's reading the values inside. Anytime you're taking a baseline, you better establish what your outside sensor readings are as well. Building automation systems are designed to save energy and to provide that 800 parts per million. All of our buildings were designed for a different function than what we're asking them to do right now. We're asking them to bring in more fresh air, to exhaust all the makeup air, don't recirculate air, and we're just not fit up for it. So now what we're trying to do is figure out kind of a belt and suspenders approach, a way around it. Do we turn on the heat and crack the windows? Yeah, in some situations you need to. Or if you have one of those new state-of-the-art buildings, you need to make sure that your filters are those MERV 13 filters, and that you're making sure the CO2 readings are down low, and that you're exhausting air and you don't have recirculating air coming back into the building. These are all things your facilities department needs to know. They need to know with excruciating detail for every building that you have. We talk about MERV 13 filters, and keep in mind there's limitations with filters. So not every piece of equipment can handle a MERV 13 filter. What will happen is, so for folks that remember back in school, back when you were in school, univent heaters are those rectangular metal boxes on the side wall of a room that have a vent off the top that blow air out. That's a univent heater. Those have dampers inside of them that adjust mixed air in the space with outdoor air coming in to maintain that CO2 temperature. When they're working, they work fine. Problem is, we can only put up to a MERV 7 filter in them. They're not designed to handle that high level of filtration. Once you start putting in higher levels of filtration, you're going to overtax the system and you're going to start burning out motors. They're not designed to handle that pressure drop across it. So what do? Right? This is what everyone's telling us to do. You need to install MERV 13. Well, you need to get creative. You need to figure out, can we run a MERV 7 filter in there? Can we crack the windows? And can we get a portable HEPA unit? And what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve air changes per hour, which during this time, what's happened is people are speaking different languages and it's become very confusing. Initial requests were for everyone to do an air quality report. Well, from a facility standpoint, air quality means that we're checking for mold, we're checking for carbon monoxide, we're checking for CO2, checking for dust particulate level. That's an air quality report. I think what people wanted and what people have been asked for, and this is some of the guidance that Raphael's team has been giving out to people, is you actually want an airflow report. You want a balancing report. You want to know how much air is coming through the unit and exhausting out of the space. You don't care if there's mold. You want to know that there's air exchange. There are two different reports and two different approaches. So it's trying to clean up that communication gap. Harvard's guidance was 5 air changes per hour. You're probably familiar in medical institutions where that number is much, much higher. In the school environment, even during COVID, the target's 5, roughly around 5, 4 to 5, 6, kind of. That's not how we design buildings. We design buildings based off of CFM, cubic feet per minute of air movement. So now the engineers had to retool their language so that way we could do the equation to figure out air changes per hour. And I think we've got there now. But those were some of the hiccups along the way, trying to figure out what everyone was looking for and how we could achieve that. So in the interest of getting those air changes per hour, so if you have a univent heater in your classroom and you know you can get 2 air changes per hour, and if you crack the windows, you know you can get another air change per hour, it's all calculations and it's all math. So how am I going to get that remaining 2? Well, what you can do is you can get an air cleaner, a HEPA portable air cleaner, if it's sized correctly. And that will help you meet that target of 5. So if you size them correctly and it's going to circulate air through that HEPA filter and clean the air in that interior space, it equates to, say, 2 air changes per hour. Well, now you've hit your 5. But you need all 3 pieces to hit that mark. And those are some of the directions and some of the guidance that we're trying to get to people. We're not there yet. And the reason I wanted to find out from Raphael, thermal comfort, that's the next hurdle. Our buildings are not designed to handle this much fresh air. And as it gets colder, we're not going to be able to maintain 70 degrees. We just can't without plugging in space heaters all over the place. But we're going to overload our circuits because we're already plugging in portable air filters every place. So there's only so much capacity our facility can give us. So is it better to have kids and teachers in school where the classroom's 65 degrees? I don't know. I've got 2 high school kids that go to public schools in Massachusetts. I use them as my benchmark. I'm like, 65? Like, we could do 65. I'm like, 60? Like, no. No way am I going to sit at a desk when it's 60 degrees out. That's cold. Sitting at a desk for 6 hours and 60 degrees, that's chilly. If you're outside moving around doing yard work, you're fine. But we're going to hit a tipping point where it's going to be really hard for us to make sure we're hitting all of our target points and still providing enough thermal comfort in the space that's going to keep people able to go in and learn safely. There's a lot of information out there. I support the MTA, but I also support DESE, and I also support the science out there showing the social emotional piece of kids getting back to school. It's not just the educational piece, it's them getting out of their bedrooms for at least a day or two to break up, then zooming into a classroom, some of the same space they've been in for 16 hours, during the week. So it's been a really tricky time, and I hope that some of that information has helped out or at least answered some questions. We can do a Q&A now if people would like.
What about UV lighting as far as filtration as opposed to using the HEPA filters, because that wouldn't restrict airflow in your systems?
So there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of people looking at UV, UVC lighting. There's also bipolar ionization. UV lighting has proven to work in certain situations. It's a different scenario. What you're trying to do is you're trying to, depending on the engineer, depending on where they install it, you're typically installing the UV lighting on your return ductwork. So that way you can kill the return air so it can mix back into the building safely. You're not trying to install it on the supply air because there's no reason to kill the fresh air coming into the space. It has proven to be effective. It's not a quick response because it's a huge capital investment into your building. It's a maintenance investment into your building. Newer buildings right now, they're looking at it as a potential pandemic option in your operating system, meaning that the systems will be installed in your building, and during your normal day-to-day, you really don't need to run them because we're not in a pandemic situation. But God forbid another pandemic shows up, and it will. They always do. It seems that they're getting a little bit stronger and stronger. From a facility standpoint, you can hit a button, turn your system into pandemic mode, and it will shut off the return air registers, turn on your UV lights, and hopefully clean out the air and clean out the spaces. Bipolar ionization is a different technology. What it does is it ionizes the fresh air particles coming into your space, making them both positive and negative. And then they go chase down any bugs or any dust or anything that's in the space, latch onto it because it's the positive or negative charge, making it heavier so it drops down. So it encapsulates it, drops it down, and takes it out of the system. That's good for taking care of the air that's in the actual space itself. Different technology, a little bit newer. The problem with bipolar is you're relying on the manufacturer's certification that it's working because none of it's really been checked out by EPA yet. But depending on the building design would dictate which system you want to go with. If it's 100% fresh air makeup to the classroom, you don't need to treat your exhaust air because 100% of your exhaust air is going through the roof. So you may want bipolar ionization to treat the room itself, right? To get that extra layer of protection in there to help you meet your 5 air changes per hour. The other thing that people are looking at, UV uplighting. So at your ceiling level of your classroom, you would mount these wall-mounted wall sconces that project UV lighting up towards the ceiling. So through normal thermal cycling of hot air rising, cold air settling, the air rotates up in the ceiling level and the UV light shoots up and kills the virus that's at the ceiling level. It's a little bit dangerous. I don't know for folks that have had middle schoolers go through their house. They're like a whirlwind, tornado, Tasmanian devil. I can see those fixtures, either being used as pull-up bars, or for anyone that has younger kids, remember the bottle flip contest we had a couple years ago where you're trying to flip the Poland Spring bottle and have it land on its back? Yeah, I can see all of those UV uplights covered with Poland Springs bottles. So there's a lot of different technologies out there. Again, you just have to be careful and make sure you're doing your homework on it because some of them are very safe, others not so much. Some people are buying air cleaners that emit ozone. Ozone's horrible. It attacks the linings. I mean, I'm talking to nurses. You know all the downsides of using ozone. Ozone's a great product if you're going in to do fire restoration and get rid of that smoke smell in a house when the building's empty. But you don't want to go to Brookstone and buy a little air cleaner that's going to be spitting out ozone. No offense to Brookstone, but they've sold them in the past. And it's caused irritant issues with people that have used them. So you just have to be cautious because there's a lot of products on the market right now.